we got hazing. That is a thing again. What in the world should we even be surprised? I'm going to tell you why we shouldn't be surprised. And I'm also going to tell you that hazing has happened at Tennessee that I'm aware of, and what the difference is between okay hazing and really, really bad hazing. Here we go.
What the? What was he thinking?
Release the hounds.
The Dave Hooker Show.
Keep cool.
A presentation of OffTheHookSports.com.
Can you do me a favor, Caleb Calhoun, and try to describe the hazing that was going on at Northwestern as lightly, I guess, as you can, because it's kind of gross. It involves sexual type of innuendo. Do you want to describe it for me and just take me off the hook, because I don't really want to get
let me pull up the full.
Well, and then I'll tell you that there's a school that I covered that people would all know, a high school that did this as recently as 10 years ago, a very similar type of thing. I'm not going to tell you which school. And I'm going to tell you the hazing that was allowed in the early 90s, late 90s, and early 2000s at Tennessee. But first, can you just describe this Northwestern hazing, because it's gross?
Yeah, I'm trying to be very,
not gross,
I guess, PG when I'm talking about this. But basically, the former players, the main former player who spoke on, who was the whistleblower in this, said that there was this practice called running, which primarily freshmen, if they made mistakes on the field and in practice, they would be restrained by a group of 8 to 10 upperclassmen dressed in various Purge-like masks. You guys seen The Purge? You know The Purge, where they it was a movie where they, like, every year.
I know the movie. I know the concept of the movie. You got 24 hours to take out your vengeance on society.
You can commit whatever crime you want in that 24 hours. Yes, and there was this group that would wear these masks, and so it was like scary looking. So they'd wear those type of masks, and they would restrain the player, and they would begin. They would begin dry humping the victim in a dark locker room. Okay. Basically, with
or without clothes on.
That part is not clear. I believe with clothes on, to be fair, and the reason I say it is because the phrase dry humping kind of implies clothes.
Right. So, okay. So, well, I can tell you that a school in East Tennessee that's a prominent school, this was something that I dug into that was happening. I was working for ESPN at the time, and ESPN didn't want to run it because they were scared. But this happened, in which players would be hazed by having to get in the middle of a group, and guys were undressed, at least from the waist down, and they would shake stuff close to the players. I don't know if there's physical contact or no, but I can tell you that when I interviewed one of the players, he was in tears. So I don't doubt that it actually happened. And I interviewed other people that confirmed this. So I don't want to get into that. I'll tell you the hazing that was allowed at Tennessee, which was the kind of hazing that hazing should be. And that was very lighthearted. And basically the way it worked is they said, you're going in the ice tub. And I think that Fred may have mentioned this when you were on with us, but we talked about it more in depth in the Celebrate 98 series, Dante Stallworth coming up this week. But the hazing was this: hey, freshman, you're going into the ice tub. And for those that haven't played organized sports, ice tub is the best and worst thing as far as rehab. When you get in it, you're terribly, terribly uncomfortable. Your little friend might run away to Iowa, if you know what I mean. So much. That's the best way I can put it. But after 2 minutes, and if you can, I worked my way up to 20 minutes when I was doing CrossFit, believe it or not. And you have no more muscle soreness. You know the muscle soreness when you lift too hard one day, Caleb, and like a day or two later, you're like, you had zero muscle soreness. So it absolutely works. So, but there was a means to an end. You start to like the ice bath. And the deal was, you either go in the ice bath or somebody's going to throw your rear in there. And that was it. That was hazing. Now, I'll give you an example of another hazing So that one's okay. Wouldn't you agree, Caleb? That
Well,
one's okay.
I don't blame anybody for doing this back then, but I would say it's not okay now. And here's why. Because we have more knowledge.
Ice bath thing?
Yes, and here's why. And we learned a lot about this during COVID. And when I was working, we covered a lot of COVID details and heart conditions and things like that. When you get dunked into cold water, nothing sends your heart into a greater state of shock than that. So if you have any sort of heart condition that you may not know about, it could actually trigger a heart attack immediately. And so while theoretically I'm with you, it's, for those who don't know, I studied some Titanic history in the past. Listen to the people who survived it that like actually sunk into the water. The worst moment was the second they got submerged into that water, and most of them died right then.
Okay, so, I love you to death, but I'm going to differ on this with you for a little bit. I think that is as natural as stretching. So yes, you could find that 1 in a million person that it has a bad effect on. But I think ice baths, for those that train heavy, especially during preseason camp, I think that they're very valuable. So I think for the most part, you're showing. Now, if they say I've got a heart condition, don't put me in the ice bath, then don't. But so I think that was okay. But let me give you an example of another hazing that that to me is probably a little over the top. That happened at Tennessee. Brian Darden shows up at Tennessee. And there was one reporter there that said he will be one of the best tailbacks at Tennessee. So this was the mid-late 90s. And Brian Darden was, a lot of you probably know his name. He was highly rated. And a lot of the media said right then and there that this guy is going to be the next Reggie Cobb type of cat. This is going to be the next great player, Chuck Webb, if you want to throw it in there. Well, here's what Brian Darden did, according to multiple sources. Brian Darden trash talked the whole time he showed up. And he happened to trash talk to one of the best defenses that ever walked to the face of the earth. So they could run play action. Brian Darden got the hell knocked out of him. It didn't matter. He didn't even have the ball, and he was going to get hit. That probably broke Brian Darden's spirits at some point. So that is hazing. Did he deserve it because he trash talked before he had done anything? Probably. But that's hazing when you take away somebody's will to play gone too far. And what happened to Brian Darden? I don't even know. But he left Tennessee. He came in talking trash. He got hazed to the extreme. And when I say extreme, he got physically hit more oftentimes in practice than anybody that was on the team. So that's probably a little bit too far. Now, let me say this about Northwestern. Northwestern decided about 10 years ago they want to play big boy football, right? They have one of the most beautiful, now it might not be as expensive, might not be as spacious, but they have one of the most beautiful on Lake Superior, I believe, workout facilities that you'll ever see. They went all in. They made sure that Pat Fitzgerald, who has now been suspended for 2 weeks, would be their coach long-term, and he has ties there, so they were able to do that. So am I surprised that it happened at Northwestern? Absolutely not. And here's the reason why. When you decide to play big-time football, you need a lot of people. Not just the coaches, not just the players. You need a lot of people. So what happened when Lane Kiffin started going a little loopy crazy and, you know, they were drinking bourbon on a Sunday night when they were getting ready for next week's opponent? Well, they took a guy and they said, and it was David Blackburn, and they said, you're now the director of football operations. You're not an associate AD anymore because we need you in and around this football team. And that's exactly what they did. Does Northwestern have that in place because they grew so quickly? I'm guessing not. I'm guessing not.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And for people who don't know, with football programs, Dave, you know this. There's a lot of different factors that go into play where I don't want to be the guy that says the head coach isn't responsible, but sometimes a head coach is not necessarily – they can be a little more hands-off in things that they don't want anything to do with, but they don't get involved to stop. And if I were to give an example, I'll give an example since I went to Maryland. You remember the whole DJ Durkin, Jordan McNair issue about 5 years ago?
The young man died because he was pushed hard during a preseason camp.
Yes. Now, what people don't realize was Durkin had did he have a rigorous, probably way too far conditioning program in preseason camp? Yes, absolutely. But Maryland, the school, contracted with a group of Johns Hopkins professionals for their medical staff for the football program that was not a competent medical staff. They didn't know what they were doing. And people have been calling for years for Maryland to switch their medical staff. Never did. Durkin, yes, he made the decision to stick with that medical staff, but he doesn't know medicine or anything like that. So he probably is just assuming that they know what they're talking about. And when McNair collapsed, one of the things that people like the medical staff didn't know to immediately pour ice on him, which apparently if you collapse from heat stroke, you immediately want to cover somebody in ice to try to calm them. The medical staff didn't know that and didn't do it. So Durkin took the fall. I'm not saying it, someone has to, but I wonder where Pat Fitzgerald is in this. Now, Pat Fitzgerald, the former player, the whistleblower says Pat Fitzgerald knew fully, but it's one former player. I'm going to, again, Pat Fitzgerald has his own right to defend himself on this. This kind of reminds me of, look, I'm not a Butch Jones fan, but this reminds me of, remember with the AJ Johnson scenario when Dre Bowles claimed that Butch Jones told the team to jump Dre Bowles for telling on AJ Johnson. And we don't know if that's true or not. Dre Bowles transferred to Michigan State.
Yeah. And I'll give you another example. Mike Leach told Craig James's son that you have a concussion, go sit in a dark shed, basically. That's not as off base as it sounds, because they have you sit in a cool, dark area when you have a concussion. Now, it sounded insensitive at the time, and it was probably insensitive, but it wasn't as crazy as it sounded. But hazing,
I think Craig James was a total diva and was upset that his son wasn't getting more playing time and tried to get
Totally agree with that. But in the 90s, hazing was a big thing. It was a hot topic issue. What are the hot topic issues? I mean, it may be the LGBT, whatever that acronym is, but hazing was a hot issue at the time. So it was something that was looked at the time as being a major problem in football. So people addressed it, and people got incredibly sensitive to that, and they should have. But am I surprised that slipped? Am I surprised that a program that's busting at the seams, or at least trying to compete with the top programs in its conference and its nation, am I surprised this has cropped in again? Not at all. A memo will be sent out to all the different athletic directors or coaches, not just football, about hazing, about how important that is. I think they'll revisit this issue and everything will be fine.